Alex, welcome to Rebel Book Club.
Hi, thanks for having me.
There you go. Alex. You have a cocktail inspired by being deliberately restful.
I would love to get the recipe for it. I should have written it down while I was going with that.
Don't worry, we'll share it with you, Alex. We'll share it. Don't worry.
Fabulous.
Rich, thanks for joining. Keep staring out across the city and staying calm. We'll see you soon. Alex, welcome. Lovely to see you.
Thanks very much for having me.
Oh, great to have you here. We're going to jump straight in. 5 quick fire questions, and then we're going to open it up if that works for you. Firstly, whereabouts are you at the moment? I'm conscious of time zones, and it's become very normal to speak to anyone anywhere.
Yeah, I'm in California, so 8 hours behind you guys. So it's late morning here. Too early for a cocktail, but not too early to collect a recipe and look forward to it.
Love that. Cool. What was the last nonfiction book you read?
The last nonfiction book I read was called Redefining Rich, which will be coming out this summer by a terrific author named Shannon Hayes, who is a farmer and entrepreneur. And so it's about slowing down, kind of rethinking, sort of understanding and acting on what's valuable in one's life, and sort of using lessons from from farm work and from managing farms to, managing the variety of gigs and side projects and jobs, etc., that, now define most of our lives. So that's the last book I read.
Sounds great. And to go one level deeper, which nonfiction book has had the biggest impact on you in the last couple of years?
Let's see. I might nominate the new book by James Sussman called Work, which is a 5,000-year history of work and our ideas about it. There are not that many books about work that start with 3 billion years ago, and like the creation, and metabolism and biological work, and then proceeds down through fire, etc. But that does a really terrific job, I think, of casting a very wide kind of view of the place of different kinds of work in our lives, and I think giving a really useful degree of depth and perspective to this thing that we all live with.
Amazing. And where do you like to read?
Where do I like to read? I tend not to read in bed. I usually read on the sofa. Usually almost always wherever I'm reading, I've got one or another dog beside me. So we've got 2 kind of Velcro dogs. So, if you're sitting down, if you're reachable, then no matter where you are, there's a dog.
Good reading companions. And out of interest, do you prefer paperback, Kindle, or an audiobook?
For books that I really want to get into, it's still paper, because for me, reading is kind of a martial art. I underline a lot, I annotate, I use Post-its, and so the physicality of a paper book is important for sustaining that kind of engagement. So I still go for paper, as you can see.
Yeah, no, very strong background. And as Ben put in the chat, I think reading as a martial art is our quote of the day already. Love that. And final question: power nap or a long walk?
Why choose? I tend to go for short naps, but both have their place. Just as rest and work each have their place.
Good answer. Cool. That's the quick fire section done.
So we're now on to Alex, on to how it started, how it's going. So for those that don't know your story, and unlike some non-fiction authors, you didn't indulge your backstory in rest, but we'd love to hear a little bit more. So how did you end up studying and writing about rest? Tell us the sort of path that led you to this.
Oh, the really brief story is that I started thinking seriously about the subject about 10 years ago, when I was on a sabbatical, actually in Cambridge with Microsoft Research. And about halfway through, I realized that I was getting a huge amount of stuff done. I was reading a lot. I was having great ideas, but I didn't feel that kind of sense of constant time pressure and being sort of half a project behind that is just kind of part and parcel of life in Silicon Valley, as much, and it started me thinking that, maybe actually the key to to doing the kind of work that we really love to do, sort of depends not on working ever faster and ever longer hours, but in kind of rethinking the relationship between sort of work and rest and creativity. And that kind of planted a seed that took a couple years to kind of germinate. But ultimately, I realized that when you look at the lives of, sort of famous, of Nobel laureates and, other sorts of famous, incredibly accomplished people, you see see them constructing a version of the kind of routines that I had discovered during that sabbatical. And then finally, there was some work in the neuroscience of creativity and sort of the psychology of mind wandering that helped kind of put the pieces together and explain why it is that certain kinds of rest turn out to be really essential for stimulating and sustaining creative lives. So that's kind of the backstory to the book.
And I mean, there's a huge interest and conversation this month around napping tactics as a way, and obviously we've all gone into a new way of working in the last year, and so already on the chat here I can see Willow, Emma, Anna all saying that trying out the tactic of napping, but either struggling to fall into a nap, or if they do, then being in zombie mode, or going too deep. I remember the story in the book about holding the key or whatever it was in the hand, and that sort of weight show. I forget which great philosopher it was, but what have you learned personally about the art of napping?
First of all, practice makes perfect. I think that the more seriously, it's one of these things where the more you do it, the better your body gets at it. It's like, there is a kind of muscle memory to to napping. The second is that even if you don't fall completely asleep, those 20 minutes where you're reclining, you're relaxed, you're letting your mind wander, those actually do still have substantial restorative value. And then the third thing is that keep the nap short. Really, set basically either nap for 20 minutes or for 90 minutes, right? You either want to wake up before you fall into a deep sleep, or let yourself go through one complete sleep cycle, which is about 90 minutes long. Okay. And doing so will avoid, that kind of that sort of sense of sleep inertia or sort of sleep hangover that can come if you wake up in the, and you've interrupted and you've come out of deep sleep too early.
And Anna and Igor just reminded me that it was Dali, of course, that had that tactic, and the outcome was, melting clocks and a surrealist revolution. So it obviously worked for him. And just some context on your experience or your journey in the last year. So since Rest has come out, since we've gone into a global pandemic, and our way of working and managing our home routines has shifted, how has that changed your life? Have you changed tactics, or has your rest become a bigger part of your life, or has it been harder?
I actually had my latest book, which is about the global movement to adopt the 4-day week, actually came out the week before bookstores and other businesses here in the States started closing down in March of last year. So I got to do exactly one reading, and then the whole rest of the promotion schedule and the talks and everything blew up. For me, the big shift has been moving everything to online, right? I've done bookstore readings via Zoom. All the talks, the keynotes that I do are online. You can't see it, but I've essentially turned the garage into kind of a home studio, with the serious lighting, and spent plenty of time on the backgrounds, and I've got a teleprompter and other stuff. So, which has kind of accelerated a set of changes in book promotion and speaking that had already kind of been inching forward before the pandemic, but really accelerated as a consequence of it. In terms of my rest, I think that the main thing I really miss is not being able to travel. And I think that business travel itself presents a whole bunch of challenges in terms of work and rest that I always enjoyed kind of grappling with. And so, of the various things I haven't been able to do, that's the thing that I miss most. But, when you write a book about sort of the value of, naps and sort of morning routines and leisure, I think maybe, I think perhaps your daily life is a little bit less impacted, or your working life is, than some people's. So that's my story so far.
Thank you so much, Alex. And Chris has just said, I moved to a 4-day week in May last year. Best thing I've ever done.
Excellent.
Well done, Chris. So we're now moving on to crowdsourced chaos questions from our community. Off we go. So
on that note, we're testing out some new features on Hopin, guys. You should be able to see the Q&A. So you can see chat, polls, people, Q&A. So if anyone wants to drop in a question there, please feel free, and we'll keep an eye on those. But to kick things off, Alex, do you have any advice for getting teams at work to take adequate rest?
Yeah, well, yes. Okay, so first of all, it's got to start with the top. Every company that I've looked at that has moved to 4-day weeks or some other sort of shorter work week has had, the boss has not only been a champion of it or been, tolerant of it, they're often the ones who are driving it. So I think that it is a big enough culture change so that it's, you can try to do it sort of in a sort of guerrilla style, in opposition to the to sort of your work culture, but that raises all kinds of challenges. And there were, and the benefits are so great for everybody that it is worth trying to do it collectively. So I think that the next, so that's thing number one. Number two is, I think, recognizing that, we think of issues around kind of rest and recovery as almost as entirely kind of individual and personal ones, much in the same way that we often think of sort of productivity as something that mainly happens between my eyes and the, and the brain and the sort of computer screen. But in fact, there is a deeply social dimension to attention, to focus, and to rest, right? My capacity to concentrate at work depends on everybody else's ability to respect my time, respect the need to concentrate in order to work on really sort of critical things. And if you are and if you want to sort of build in more time for rest or shorten the work week, everybody needs to cooperate in order to make that happen. The third thing is that you gotta create time for it. And since there are only 168 hours in the in the week, something else has got to give. Fortunately, studies show that most of us lose 2 to 4 hours of productive time per day to overly long meetings, multitasking, distractions, interruptions, etc. So if you can start to get a handle on those things, you can actually go an awful long way to building time into your schedules so that either everyone has time for breaks, has time for naps, or time to go home early. So getting serious about meeting discipline, for example, sort of designing the workday to carve out particular times where everyone can work in a super focused way, and using technology a little more mindfully so that you're a little more thoughtful about sort of how everyone uses the Slack channels or email, etc., are all things that can help buy everyone more time. So I think that though I think that the most powerful kind of rest actually is sort of closing on Thursdays and giving everybody a 3-day weekend every week. The benefits of that really are tremendous, both for individuals but also for companies. So
yeah, and that's a great set of answers, Alex. And the 4-day work week is becoming serious policy. We read about it through Rutger Bregman with Utopia for Realists a few years ago. And which country, can you remind us, which country is it getting some traction?
Iceland actually has started implementing it for their public sector workers, and that's about 15% of the workforce. So it hasn't gotten a lot of press, but they actually have started moving people to 4-day work weeks. Valencia, Spain has been quite a bit kind of sort of noisier about planning to do a subsidized 3-year trial. And there are other places. There were a number of sort of the Odsherod commune in Denmark. I know I'm mispronouncing that, but it's essentially a kind of province in Denmark. The municipal workers there are in the middle of a 3-year trial to do 4-day weeks. And actually in Seoul, South Korea, interestingly, they've got a mayoral race going on, and the top contenders for sort of there are all talking about implementing measures to incentivize companies to move to 4.5-day sort of work weeks. So it's actually, it's a movement that at the policy level, interestingly, is now starting to gain more speed and kind of catching up with what's been happening in the private sector.
And a couple of people already commented that they've seen it or it's happened within their businesses' versions of it. When you hear about the challenge of, culturally it feels like we've got to do more and less in order to earn the extra half day or day. Where have you seen good sort of resolutions to that?
So I have seen companies in all kinds of industries, right? Not just like creative firms or places where you've got really long lead times, and it's also not just like, guys selling like surf equipment down by the beach, who are kind of all about lifestyle, who are doing this. I'm seeing large law firms, Kromann Rumert in Denmark, which is a 500-person firm. They represent shipping lines, and they do like they're like really serious lawyers. They put on suits and all of that. They're not one of these like super left-wing law firms. They now offer the 4-day week as one option. I see a bunch of restaurants that were doing it before the pandemic. Factories, even nursing homes have experimented with moving their staffs to shorter work weeks with really terrific results. I think that it does require some looking closely at how you work, at how people work together, identifying inefficiencies and going after them. And it does require people to adopt a kind of experimental mindset about how they work. And so, there is, it's not just about lopping a day off the week and you kind of magically unlock this kind of fairy box of increased productivity just because people have more energy. There is a greater degree of thoughtfulness or kind of discipline that's required to make it work. But, almost every place that tries it reports that it's well worth doing, and that people and even people who are skeptical at the beginning don't want to go back, and clients who at the outset maybe we're kind of wondering what in the world you guys are up to, say this is really terrific, and in fact we would love to do it in our own companies.
Wow, fantastic. We've got a lot of questions being upvoted. So Ben, what's the top of the list?
I think we'll go with the most popular from Judy so far. So I guess moving on to, you touched on productivity and I guess your 4 principles around breaking up the day and squeezing in that productive session early in the morning, maybe getting a nap in, hopefully getting outside in nature for a nice walk. How does someone in a more traditional 9-to-5, or say, for example, a nurse, manage to do that when there is a bit less flexibility in their existing career?
Right. So people who don't have a lot of flexibility in their jobs or are working in jobs that have a high degree of unpredictability about them, right? As an ER nurse, you don't know when the next person is going to come through the door, or how, or sometimes how long cases are going to take to resolve. The reality is that unless you do something like move everyone from 8-hour shifts to 6-hour shifts, that people in those jobs, let's put it this way, the people who last in those jobs, who don't burn out, are really protective about their personal time, about their weekends. And so they essentially exercise in their own time the kind of discipline and control over their hours that they cannot at work. And this is important for 2 reasons. Number one, just at a practical level, it sort of it increases the odds that you will have time for the kind of self-care, maintenance, etc., necessary to recover from stressful jobs. The second thing is that having that sense of control over your life and over your time psychologically is really, really important, to all of us. And so being able to exercise it, being serious about exercising it off the job, and having things that are compelling enough to take your mind off work, which is the other really big challenge with highly stressful, highly engaging occupations, is that's the strategy that most people pursue when they're unable to actually bring this kind of stuff into their workplaces or into their working days.
Interesting, thank you. And further to that, from Megan, what do you think of companies having unlimited annual leave policies? There's quite a lot of chat buzzing around about people's different strategies and things as well.
Yeah, I think that these unlimited vacation policies so far seem to not actually increase the amount of vacation that people actually take. I mean, partly this is, I'm sort of thinking particularly about Silicon Valley firms where you can, in theory, sort of take unlimited vacations, but the culture and the social norms, the promotion advancement practices are such that they still reward people who are sleeping under their desks rather than people who are going off and hiking for for a month after finishing that gigantic project or launching that big product. So I mean, I think that I think that the other thing is that these are policies that put a lot of burden on individuals to negotiate with their managers, to work out with their teams how to actually implement them. And that also creates a kind of downward pressure on their usage. You see this kind of thing, at least before the pandemic, also with, flexible work policies, or just about anything that, virtually any policy that puts you in a different category from your colleagues is one that even in well-meaning companies are less likely to be used rather than more likely. So that's what I think.
Awesome. And then we've got a few popping up here around active rest. So there's one from Caroline and also an anonymous one. Would you count active reading, so as you mentioned, underlining, writing notes, putting post-its, as active rest, or is that deep play?
Since it's for me, it's work, because I don't do this when I'm reading Terry Pratchett, right? I mean, I love Pratchett, but I'm not like paying close attention to it the way that I do to scholarly work or scientific articles. So in my case, that sort of serious engagement for me falls very much in under the rubric of of work. That's not to say that Pratchett doesn't reward close close reading, or let's say WandaVision or The Mandalorian to a lesser degree warrant really close watching and following out of different narrative threads, minor characters, etc. But that is still a different kind of thing than the sort of mental engagement that's required in order to produce the next 1,500 words in a section of the next of the chapter of the next book.
Awesome, thank you, Alex. And we've got 2 sections to go. I hope the caffeine is still surging strong. The next section is called Break the Book. So this is like All Good Rebels. This is our chance to challenge the scientist or the status quo or the clear argument that you have that can lead to some interesting answers. So there's 2 parts to this for us. One is, and these questions have come up a lot from members, one is the personal one. So there's the kind of interesting reflection on, and this is true for me personally too. So at a certain stage of my life, the 20s, we could call it, sprinting at projects or at life was impactful, memorable, wonderful. Some of the best relationships I've formed, some of the best projects I've been part of. And there's very much in sort of a non-deliberate rest mode. Is there a generational divide in terms of how we approach rest? And is really deliberate rest for once we're getting past that stage of life?
Mm-hmm. The answer is that there is a generational divide. The question is whether it is something, is this basically, is this like economics and, and social pressure, or is there some like, or a biological dimension to it? I think that it's, I would say it's probably like 5% biology in the sense that we can survive on less sleep and and just kind of abuse our bodies more when we're younger than we can when we're older. I can a meal of Skittles and a beer no longer sustains me the way that it did when I was, in college or graduate school.
Skittles, that's a word. It's a food I haven't heard for a while.
I do, I also do put this question to people who have moved their companies to 4-day weeks, sort of looking back for you. Is it that do those long nights, like sleeping under your desk, the 12-hour days on, weeks of that sort of thing, does that seem necessary now, or does it seem kind of stupid? And even people who are who are very firm believers in the benefits of 4-day weeks in their companies still tend to come down on the side of, actually, when you're young, when you've got a steep learning curve and no family, when you're early in your career, there is an argument to be made that you can learn an awful lot working in that way. The problem is that we don't know when to stop. And depending on the industry you're in, odds are you will have an employer or a manager who have a whole bunch of incentives to encourage you to keep going well beyond the point when the returns start to diminish. I also noticed in rest that a lot of the people who I wrote about were people who, like us, were kind of stupid when we were younger, and they only discovered the value of rest later when they had families. They'd perhaps had some kind of health crisis or breakdown. And so I think that, for better or worse, everybody does seem to need, almost everybody discovers the value of rest the hard way. And I think that the positive side of that, though, is that even if you have worked in a very different kind of way for most of your career, and you identify your success with, your ability to grind longer than anybody else, it is possible actually to change how you work and to develop ways of working that bring in more rest and allow you, and are more sustainable, but still allow you to keep working at a very high level.
So yeah, and we may well have seen a generational shift on that a little bit in the last 12 months because of what's happened.
It'll be fascinating to see how all that plays out.
Yeah. And this question surfaced quite a lot. Is rest a privilege? Is the simple question, and I guess a bit more context was, so for people who are in a fight in life, whether it's personal stress or they're activists, campaigners, refugees, emergency responders, soldiers, or even new parents, right? Where there's feel like there isn't this space to. It's a luxury. It's something that you can only do if you've got time to read a book about it, for example. What's our role? What part can we play in helping people on the extremes get better at resting?
Yeah, the answer. I think that the answer is that the world treats rest as a privilege rather than the right that it ought to be, and I think that the answer to that, for me, one of the big answers to that is actually a shorter work week. That sort of making it, one of the very simplest ways to give people more rest is to move to 6-hour days or 4-day weeks, so that everybody has this as an option, that nobody has to pursue it in opposition to their companies or in a way that risks letting down their colleagues or stalling their careers, and that it is available from top to bottom, right? It's not just, it's not just the CEOs and the thought leaders who get to go off fly fishing or whatever for a week in order to kind of recharge the mental batteries. This is something that benefits absolutely everyone. And so I think that advocacy for those kinds of structural changes, and maybe well-designed flexible work schemes or others, can also be part of this. Legislation to erode the gig, to turn the gig economy into something that is essentially not an algorithmicized way of, sort of exploiting people and transferring more money to, to venture capitalists and sort of a small cadre of billionaires. All that these kinds of structural changes are the things that we need in order to turn rest from a privilege into a right.
And it's almost, again, it's too early to tell, but the last year we've seen versions of universal basic income here in the UK, furlough schemes and so on, where actually not everyone's been able to do it, but those that have, it's created, maybe there's been more deliberate rest has been had. I've just picked up this interesting book, which is kind of the real rebel book club in the world. So the book collectors of Daraa, which is the Syrian rebels, their underground library, and the stories that carried them through the war. And it's about how there's focus on building this underground library and working and enjoying education as a way of escaping what was going on above their heads. And so maybe an extreme example, but there's a lot of powerful stories out there about how people have found calm in the chaos. So we always wrap up our chats with action stations. So Ben, we've got a few stats to share, haven't we, from the club for Alex, and then a couple of questions to wrap up.
We do. So the good news is that 85% of our poll have all been inspired to take action from this book, and have changed their routines. And I'm sure we could share some more stats. A nice quote from Andrea said, "It made her feel much more positive about afternoon breaks, naps, and reading. I find I'm using my work time much more effectively with planned rest breaks," which is great. So some questions. What impact has the book had on the wider world to date?
Certainly, for me, I have gotten plenty of very gratifying comments about how this book has changed how we think about time, or this book has changed my life. Has it had a substantive impact on policy or something? Honestly, I have no idea. And one of the really cool things about books is they're sort of like adult children. They go off and they lead lives that are unexpected, and they go places that you don't, and they do all kinds of cool things and meet people who you never will, and that's really great. So I wish I could say more about sort of about the impact it's had in companies or something, but I just don't know, and I probably never will.
But it seems to be, listening to you tonight, Alex, and also talking about your next project, that there is a bigger mission that I don't know if it was clear in your mind at the start of this journey, but it's becoming clear around that actually you're seeing these trends shift in society, and it talked about the policy changes. And yes, the book's taking a life of its own, but do you feel like, I've got a bigger opportunity now to help drive the change, obviously through your writing, but beyond that?
Certainly through the writing. I mean, we'll see beyond, I do consult with companies about sort of about these issues, and I actually am putting the finishing touches on a couple online courses, so that like small companies that don't normally hire consultants can do for themselves the sort of stuff that I do with larger enterprises. So I do think that there are that the variety of ways in which these kinds of, not just the messages, but the way, but like explanations of the work, the instructions for how to do this work yourself, how to bring it into your life, how to redesign your time, that these things are becoming more widespread and accessible, which I think is entirely a good thing. But I do think that we are just kind of taking these subjects more seriously, and I think we're recognizing also that over the last year that there are these these big structural issues around work-life balance and gender inequity in the workplace and inequality that have turned out to be incredibly stubborn, despite sometimes our best efforts at alleviating them. And that, we have an opportunity as we come out of the pandemic to to keep some of the things that we've changed in the workplace that we like, but to also make other changes that maybe help us deal better with some of those big issues. Not only because it is worth doing for ethical reasons, but because if you think this is the last pandemic we're going to face, where you've got essential workers who are put in these difficult positions, then you haven't read a lot of history or a lot of virology. And so we need to deal with these issues, both because we need to think about, I think, structural ways of addressing these issues, not only because we've seen the price that they pay, the drag that they cause on the economy, the drag that they cause to people's lives, but because this is not the last time that we're going to be facing these issues collectively. So, but I'm hopeful that we actually are going to be able to deal with them.
There's momentum. And we've got a final question, Ben, for Alex, and then I'm going to bring on another guest to join the conversation.
So yeah, it's the big one from us. How can we action what's in the book? And specifically, what would you like us to take forward from this meetup moving ahead?
I suppose that if there was I would say that the first thing you got to do, that I advise, is take rest seriously, right? You got to take it seriously enough to make a place for it in your life, to practice it regularly, and to not let the world drive away or distract you from it. If I had to choose one thing that I would advise everybody to do that makes a substantive difference in their lives, I'd say learn to nap. I think that the benefits of napping regularly are huge. It costs nothing. It has and it does great things for mind and body and energy level and spirit. So take a nap.
This is some of the most welcome advice we've ever heard. Nail your nap, everybody.